want to head out now to Brian Kubler. Brian, what do you have for us?
Yeah, Ashley, I just wanted to bring in Associate Law Professor of the University of Baltimore, David Jaros. David, you and I have been sitting in this trial. You're obviously much more intelligent about this stuff than I am. So talk to me about at what point in this trial did you think the state was starting to lose it a little bit?
Well, you know, the state opened on a theory that there was a rough ride, and I have no reason to think that that's not absolutely what the state believes happened. But at the end of the day, as the trial went on and on, I think many in the audience were wondering, is this all they had ultimately to prove it in court? And as the judge found, ultimately, the evidence that they could offer in court that a rough ride occurred was simply too weak.
When we talked yesterday, you gave me the jury sheets of what a jury or a judge would have to go through to find each and every count. And we were talking that your prediction was that there may be an acquittal on all charges here. It's exactly what happened. Where does the state's attorney's office go from here?
So, you know, each case in a legal sense is not binding on the next case, but there's no question that they came at this case with everything that they had, and they'll have to go back. They'll have to assess their evidence and think about not just what they believe happened, whether or not they believe a crime occurred, but ultimately whether they have the evidence to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. In many ways, the question that everyone must ask is sort of what's the way forward with this issue, and whether or not criminal prosecutions are the way forward, or there are other mechanisms we have to look to for making the community feel safe with the police, and the police feel like they can do their job.
And that, to a certain degree, is happening. New commissioner, Department of Justice, the consent decree is expected, sources are telling me, expected to come down very, very soon, which will revamp the entire police department. Kevin Davis has his own thoughts on that. We have new cameras, we have body cameras, we have seatbelts in all the new vans, we have new vans. That's happening in a kind of a grassroots effort from the police department before these trials even had an effect on anything. But the optics of this, as an attorney, I mean, explain this to me. I mean, this is their main case. We knew going in this was their main case, and we got an acquittal on absolutely every charge, which must be a blow to the state's attorney's office.
I think, you know, without saying, you know, committing whether or not it's a blow, there's no question this was the officer who was driving the van. This is the person who, at a gut level, had the most responsibility for what happened to Mr. Gray that day. Now, the prosecution can come forward and say, well, at some point there was an officer, Sergeant White, who was on the scene, and she's a higher-ranking officer. They can say Lieutenant Rice got into the van and he was closer to Mr. Gray. But I think at the end of the day, their strongest case was against Officer Goodson, and given that the evidence wasn't sufficient to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt here, they'll have to reassess.
So if not Goodson, then whom?
I think that's a question, but I think there's a more important, bigger question, which is, if not criminal prosecutions to deal with this problem, how are we going to deal with this problem? Because, you know, there's a lot that's been uncovered in the course of this case. There's been no question that rough rides are happening. There's no question, as the state's attorney acknowledged, that police are grabbing guys and jacking them up. The question is whether or not criminal prosecutions are really the right way to deal with it.
Right. But as the judge said, there was not really any evidence presented in this case that any of that happened here.
Absolutely right. I think the question, and I think the public has to understand, is if you're offended by the larger practice, you can't ignore the fact that the burden is to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that that's what happened here, and that Officer Goodson had that requisite knowledge, and the judge simply found that there wasn't enough evidence.